This is Seahawks Today. I am your host, Will Ortner, and if I'm coming to you from my house, that means there must be some pretty big breaking news around the Seattle Seahawks, and of course, there is. Right now, we've got some crazy rumors after the NFL Combine coming from Jeremy Fowler and Dan Graziano. We're going to talk about a potential blockbuster trade that could be happening for the Seattle Seahawks, as well as the latest Kenneth Walker news on today's show. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Make sure that you hit that sub button because the minute that there's any breaking news or any breaking Seahawks rumors, we're going to make sure that we have you covered. You're not going to want to miss out on any of that. Free agency is literally right around the corner. A lot of big time moves going to be made. You don't want to miss out on it, so make sure that you hit that sub button. So let's start with Kenneth Walker first. I think that's the easy trade, I guess I should say free agency rumors to kind of dive into first. I think it's always important to make sure that we're talking about anything and everything that can be happening with our running back in Seattle. Now, I obviously reported last week, honestly, even into the kind of beginning of February, that I thought Kenneth Walker was going to have a really good market when it came to free agency. He's going to be the top running back, and more that we hear news about Kenneth Walker, the more and more I realize that he's probably not going to be in Seattle. And I do think that that's very important to kind of come to terms with and come to grips with, because Kenneth Walker is obviously a very good running back, but I also think it's easy for a lot of us to look at Kenneth Walker and go, well, hey, look at what he did the last 6 weeks. That can be him forever. But the problem is how often do we see guys that have a great run or a great stretch and then they never fully reach those heights all the time? They turn back into what they are, which in Kenneth Walker's case is a very good running back, but again, not a number one running back in the National Football League, and it does sound like he is going to get paid like a number one running back in the National Football League. Dan Graziano, in that ESPN article today, had this to say: Kenneth Walker, who sounds like he's generating enough outside interest to spell the end of his time in Seattle. That's what I told you on Friday. I said that it seemed like it was going to be done for him. Adam Schefter had Kenneth Walker going to the Texans. Albert Breer had Kenneth Walker going potentially to the Chiefs. You had the Giants stepping in, according to Matthew Berry. There are all these teams that are clearly in the Kenneth Walker sweepstakes. And if Brees Hall is going to get franchise tagged or transition tagged, which it does kind of feel like that's in play, well then he's the number one running back in the free agent class. Kenneth Walker, that is. Teams are amped to overpay for him. And I feel like Seattle, because John Schneider's a very good general manager, has a clear number that they're not willing to trade above, or willing to pay above, I should say. And if the Seahawks aren't willing to pay above that number, then they are not going to do that, and they will move on and they will find someone a little bit cheaper in free agency or potentially in a trade. I think right now, when you look at Kenneth Walker, that number's probably $9.5 to $10 million. I think that's what the Seahawks are willing to pay. It sounds like, from what you're hearing from other experts around, I was listening to Colin Cowherd and Tom Middlecoff's podcast today, and they were saying essentially, hey, Seahawks love Kenneth Walker. There's a number that they're not willing to go beyond, and Middlecoff, a former NFL scout, said, I think that's a great decision. Have a number, don't go beyond it. Because what's the difference between a Kenneth Walker and, let's pull a random running back out, Travis Etienne? There isn't a whole lot difference other than Kenneth Walker balled out at the very end of the year and Travis Etienne had a good year. Yet you're going to be able to get Travis Etienne at a more cost-effective value than you would a Kenneth Walker, because Kenneth Walker just has exploded onto the market and has clearly put himself in a position where a lot of people want to go after him. So to me, at this point, I think it's pretty fair to say Kenneth Walker will not be here in 2026 next year. What is your one-word reaction to the latest Kenneth Walker update? Let me know down below in the comments section. I think me personally, I would tell you right now that my one-word reaction is disappointing. I would say that I'm disappointed that it looks like Kenneth Walker is going to be on the way out, but at the same time, good for him, man. Good for him. It's hard to earn a big contract. It's hard to be in a position where you can make a lot of money in the National Football League. He's worked his butt off. He's earned the successes that he's had, so congratulations to him. We're going to talk about the next and probably the most important part of this article, and the piece that I think I find the most fascinating is, will the Seahawks trade for David Montgomery? Now, here's what Jeremy Fowler had to say. And at running back, the Lions David Montgomery wants out. He has a reasonable contract, owed $6 million in 2026 and is 28. That has value. Word out of Indy is that Detroit would want a decent day 3 pick, possibly a 5th rounder in return. Seattle makes sense here if they can't re-sign Kenneth Walker. What does that mean? Seattle doesn't have a 5th round pick, so how can they get around that to get David Montgomery? And so much more. I'm going to dive into all of that in just one moment, but first I need to let you know about the sponsor of today's video, and that is our good friends over at Prize Picks. Shoot your shot on Prize Picks and get $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. That's right. Prize Picks is now giving you $50 in lineups when you sign up and play your first $5. Prize Picks makes every dunk, every dime, and every board that much more exciting. So don't miss this chance to get started on America's #1 app for sports picks. Prize Picks is simple to play. Just pick more or less on any 2 to 6 player stat projections. If your picks are right, you could cash in. Pick from all your favorite sports, anything from basketball, baseball, hockey, UFC, soccer, college basketball, tennis, golf, esports, and more. New feature alert! Prize Picks now has early payouts. If your player gets off to a hot start, you now have the option to cash out those winnings before the game even finishes. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. Shout out to Prize Picks. Always really appreciate them hanging out with us here on the channel. So let's dive into David Montgomery, because I think there's a natural inclination for most people to ask, well, why does he want to be out of Detroit? Would he make sense in Seattle? And Seattle doesn't have a 5th round pick. So does Seattle have to give up more? Do they have to give up less? What would the market be like for a guy like David Montgomery? Well, I think the first thing to say, and I think the most important thing to say about David Montgomery, is he wants out of Detroit because Jahmyr Gibbs has clearly earned himself to be that #1 running back and be the top running back in that system. Now, what I find interesting is when Ben Johnson was the offensive coordinator with the Lions, it was pretty clear that they wanted to have a 2-headed running back system. In fact, they're kind of the ones who started this new world, or I guess this new way of looking at the running back position, of saying you can have 2 really good backs, let them get, their fair share of the touches. You ride with the hot hand, whatever game it is. And then by the end of the year, you see guys at their freshest. Because I would say that Kenneth Walker was able to look as good as he did at the end of the year because of Zach Charbonnet and the way Seattle ran that offense. David Montgomery obviously wants to be a little bit more of a focal point, and I do think he deserves that. What I will say is I was actually pretty shocked when I came and I looked at his stat line this last year. 1, because I knew Jahmyr Gibbs had been so good. 2, I knew that Jahmyr Gibbs was starting to take more of the bulk of the carries. But 3, when it came to David Montgomery, I think there was a general consensus, or maybe I'm just a little bit off my rocker, but I thought there was a general consensus like, David Montgomery had a pretty down year. Well, when you look at the stat line, he had 158 carries. So yes, that is significantly down from the year before where he had 185. And that year he only played in 114. So significant less carries. What I find fascinating and what I thought was pretty cool was that his rushing number, it isn't that far off, 716, and his average is 4.5 yards a touch. So his average actually went up, and it was his second highest average rushing number while he was in Detroit. So that number pops up. Very important there. And then, of course, he's still getting the touchdowns in the low red zone with 8 touchdowns on the year. So you're telling me that David Montgomery wants out. He's someone that Seattle is already linked to and Seattle could be willing to trade for. He's going to be at $6 million next year, which is a actual decrease in what you were potentially going to be willing to pay for a guy like Kenneth Walker, which would allow you to spend more money, not just on extensions for Jackson Smith and Jigba or Devin Witherspoon, but go out and get a Rashid Shaheed or try and get Kobe Bryant back, go get Josh Jobe back. I think Rick Wallen's gone, but he would save you money, and I think you're going to get a similar production because the fear right now in Seattle is that Zach Charbonnet isn't able to hit the ground running, right? Like An ACL tear is a very serious injury, and not everyone's able to come back from it right away. No problems, no issues. So you can get a guy in David Montgomery who has been a number one running back in the National Football League. You can grab him and get him into this system where you know you're going to be okay. Well, at least Charbonnet finds his way back. You're going to have George Halani there to run the football. I was reminded about McIntosh coming back from his injury. So there's another running back that you could have in the fold. Jacardier Wright, Cam Akers, Velus Jones Jr., all signed. So these are all guys that could kind of fill in that running back by committee behind David Montgomery while you wait for Zach Charbonnet to get healthy. There's also the option of going in and getting a late round draft pick and taking a running back in, that pick with pick in the 6th round, Those are all options here. I think that David Montgomery, for the right price, makes a ton of sense in Seattle. You're telling me that I'm going to get a running back who's been in the league since 2019. So he has ended up playing 4 years with the Bears, 3 years with the Lions. So he's a 7-year vet going into his 8th, but he's only 28 years old. So he's still got some juice on the tires. He's had significantly less carries because of Jahmyr Gibbs. So that means that he's also got a little bit of run left to go. I'm going to be getting a guy who's at least $3 million cheaper than what you were probably going to be willing to pay Kenneth Walker, potentially $4 million. And what you're telling me is all I have to do is give up a day 3 pick. Yeah, I'm willing to do that. Now, the problem is they want a 5th rounder. Seattle does not have a 5th rounder. Their 5th round pick was traded away to get Rashid Shaheed. Remember, Shaheed was traded for a 4th and a 5th rounder. So Seattle would have to find a way to convince Detroit that their 6th round pick is a better pick than what people thought, or John Schneider's going to have to do some wheeling and dealing where he trades back in the draft, potentially grabbing a different pick. I also think it's fascinating to see what the market would be like on Montgomery, because if the Seahawks are the only ones who are bidding for Montgomery, well, then all of a sudden that price comes way down, right? Like the reason Max Crosby, again, and I'm kind of going back to Cowherd and Middlecoff's conversation today, is Middlecoff says the reason why Crosby is going to potentially get the Micah Parsons deal and why he could potentially be worth 2 first-round picks is because you have so many teams that are bidding for Max Crosby, so the price goes up. Simple supply and demand. Well, if David Montgomery, if the only team that's really going out there and bidding for him is the Seattle Seahawks, well, now he becomes a much more fascinating product. The other thing that Seattle could potentially do is be willing to move on from a younger type of player, right? So, hey, we don't have a 6th round pick to send over to you, or a 5th round pick, We could send over, though, a 6th round pick and then maybe do some sort of pick swap as well, right? So Seattle sends their 5th rounder in 2027 and the Lions send over their 6th round in 2027. Or Seattle sends a guy like a Jacardier Wright, right? They trade him over there for David Montgomery. These are all options to me. When I look at this trade, I find it fascinating. David Montgomery's only gone over 1,000 yards twice in his career, but he's also never been under 700. And 2 of the times that he was under 700, the last year he was, under 800, which was 2024. He was only under 800 because he got hurt. And in 2025, he's under 800 because, well, Jahmyr Gibbs became more of a focal point as the year went on. I think that David Montgomery would excel in this system because he would be essentially replacing what Charbonnet was already doing for you, more of the power running through tackles. He fits into this team well. He fits into this scheme well. And I think that he would actually be able to kind of hit from the fountain of youth again because you're only going to get so many touches. So that is something that's always going to be important with him. Another thing to add in, he does catch the football well out of the backfield. Not going to sit here and say he's Darren Sproles, but having 24 catches last year and 192 yards, that's nothing to shake a stick at, especially when you're looking to get a running back in to be kind of your bell cow until at least minimum Zach Charbonnet comes back. Should the Seahawks trade for David Montgomery, yes or no? Let me know down below in the comment section. Very interested to see what you have to say. Also, by the way, we still have our St. Patrick's Day merch and our Seahawks Today t-shirt. Those are going to be in the comment section and description of today's video. You can click those links and it'll take you right where you need to go. Thank you guys so much for viewing today's video. Hit that sub button. NFL free agency is right around the corner. We are about to have a very crazy month. So make sure you don't miss out on any of that. Hit that sub button. Thank you guys so much for viewing today's video, and I cannot wait to see you next time.